Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's webinar. This is Debbie Rauscher with John Burton Advocates for Youth, and we still have some folks logging on. We're about 1 minute to 10, so I'm going to give it a couple minutes before we get started, but just wanted to say welcome. Good morning to those of you who are just logging on. This is Debbie Rauscher with John Burton Advocates for Youth. It's 10 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and jump in. So this morning's webinar, SB 940, Improving College Outcomes for Foster Youth Through Better Access to the Cal Grant. So I wanted to start with some technical details. So most of you are probably listening to the webinar through your computers, which is fine. If you do have any problems with the sound or can't get logged in, you can also call in through the number that's listed there on your screen. We will be doing questions at the very end of the whole presentation. So if you have questions that come up during the webinar, you can type them into the questions panel on your control panel, and they will get sent to one of our organizers, and we will respond to all the questions at the end of the webinar. I also want to mention that the presentation materials, as well as a recording of the webinar, will be posted on the JBay website, which is listed there. And so if you have other folks that you want to give an opportunity to listen to this, that'll be available. The PowerPoint will be sent out, and some of the additional materials that we'll be referencing will also be sent out after the webinar. In addition, I want to point out that there's a few handouts that we'll be referencing during the webinar, and those are also available on your control panel. So we will email them out, but if you want to download any of them during the webinar, if you see the handout section on your control panel, you'll see that there's 3 different handouts there, a fact sheet and 2 sample letters of support, and you can go ahead and download those at any time during the webinar. So quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today, starting with some introductions, talking about the academic outcomes of youth who have been in foster care, a little bit of overview of the Cal Grant program, which is the program that Senate Bill 940 is designed to address. We will walk through the 3 specific provisions of Senate Bill 940, and then talk about next steps, what the legislative process is going to look like, and how you can help. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we will do Q&A at the very end of the presentation. So today's presenters, I'm very excited to have, in addition to myself, Juana Hernandez, who's the Higher Education Manager with the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce. And so the Chamber of Commerce, the LA Chamber of Commerce, are co-sponsors on this bill with us at John Burton Advocates for Youth. So we're really excited to be partnering with them on this effort. Xavier Mountain, who's a youth advocate with John Burton Advocates for Youth. And then Estevan Ginsberg, a legislative aide with the Office of Senator Jim Bell, who is the author of Senate Bill 940. So to jump in with a little bit of background. To start, we just want to talk about why do foster youth experience poor academic outcomes. So as folks are probably aware, pretty much by definition, if a youth enters the foster care system, they've experienced some sort of trauma in their life. There's been some abuse or neglect that has prompted the state to remove them from the care and custody of their family. What we see in terms of the research then looking at young people who are in the foster care system is that 1 in 4 foster youth in California are chronically absent from school compared to just 1 in 10 of the general student population. So this is something that is going to have a negative impact on foster youth educational outcomes. In addition, over 1 in 5 youth in foster care has a disability, which is almost 3 times the rate of the general population. And then poor school quality. Foster youth are more likely to end up attending one of the lowest performing schools as compared to non-foster youth. So what does all this mean? It results, unfortunately, in serious academic delays for foster youth. And you can see from looking at the chart on your screen that when looking at the percentage of students who scored as being proficient or not proficient in the California Standards Test in English Language Arts, foster youth, 50% of foster youth are below basic or far below basic on this test. That is a higher percentage than the general population, which is at 24%, but it's also a higher percentage than economically disadvantaged students who fall below basic at a rate of 35%. And we see similar results when looking at the math test scores as well. So what does this then mean when foster youth are enrolling in college? Well, you can see from the chart there that foster youth are not persisting in college at the same rates as other students, even when compared to low-income students. So foster youth are persisting for at least one year at community college at a rate of 41%. That's compared to 62% for the general population, and the comparison population, which are other low-income students, foster youth are still persisting at rates that are below that of similarly economically disadvantaged students. So what does that mean? How does that persistence then translate into the ultimate educational outcome of graduation? Well, you can see from the graph there, the chart there, that by age 26, only 8% of foster youth has completed either a 2-year or a 4-year college degree. That compares to 47% of the same age comparison group. So you can see that in terms of the ultimate outcome that we're looking for, which is degree attainment, foster youth are lagging quite far behind their peers. So why do we care about whether foster youth are completing college? Well, you can see from this chart that one's level of education has an enormous impact on both unemployment rates and earnings. So the more education somebody has, the more money they're going to make, and the less likely they are to be unemployed. And so in particular, when the hard times hit, like the last recession that we had, those with just a high school diploma or less than a high school diploma are going to be much harder hit, much more likely to lose their jobs, whereas those with some college, an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, have a lot more stability. And of course, you can see then on the other side of the chart from the green side, that on average, having a degree allows you to earn more money. So then what does this then translate to into life outcomes? Well, we know from research that by age 26, foster youth are 300% more likely to be living in poverty. They're 2 to 5 times more likely to be arrested, and they're 4 to 9 times more likely to be incarcerated. So when foster youth don't have access to higher education, when they're not given the resources that are necessary to be successful in higher education, it's not just a question of, well, they don't then get the education. It translates into poverty. It translates into criminal justice involvement. It translates into a lot of other negative outcomes for this. So transitioning now from sort of that quick overview of foster youth educational trajectories to talking about the Cal Grant program, which is what SB 940 again is making some modifications to. So we know that the rate of Cal Grant receipt among foster youth is low. So the system where foster youth are most likely to enter, which is the community college system, about 85% of foster youth who participate in post-secondary education are at the community colleges. We know that only about 9% of those foster youth are receiving a Cal Grant. So the Cal Grant is the largest form of state-funded aid available to students who are participating in So why is this a problem? Well, number one, foster youth don't necessarily have parents who can help them to pay for college. And in fact, parental earnings is the number one way that college is paid for in the United States. This holds true even among low-income families. So foster youth don't have access to the most important source of money that is available to most other students. Secondly, receipt of financial aid influences academic success. So the more financial aid a student is able to get, the more likely they are to be successful. Just a couple of data points that reference this. Foster youth who receive financial aid are more than 40% more likely to accrue 15 credits in 1 year, which is one of the key indicators of whether a student will go on to ultimately complete a degree. In addition, students who receive $10,000 or more in financial aid are 43% more likely to graduate from college than those who receive $1,000 or less. And there's a host of other data out there that demonstrates the impact that financial aid has on college success. Lastly, not having enough money is a barrier to college persistence. And in surveys that have been done of foster youth, 33.3%, a full third, cited not being able to afford. So with that kind of concludes the background portion of today's webinar, and I'm going to now move into the actual provisions of SB 940 and what the bill is proposing to do. So there are 3 provisions to the bill, all designed to expand access to the Cal Grant for foster youth. So as I mentioned earlier on, we know that foster youth outcomes in post-secondary education are quite a bit lower than those of other students. We know that financial aid is a key component of whether a student is able to be successful in college. We know that the Cal Grant is one of the primary sources of financial aid available to students. And we know that foster youth are not fully utilizing the Cal Grant. So we did a bunch of research, talked to a bunch of stakeholders, youth, professionals, trying to understand really what the barriers were to foster youth being able to receive the Cal Grant and why they were not receiving the Cal Grant at rates that would really enable them to be successful. And in those conversations, we identified 3 barriers, and we then took those barriers and have translated them into policy proposals to overcome these barriers and make it easier for foster youth to get the Cal Grant. So the first provision is authorizing foster youth to receive an entitlement Cal Grant if they meet other existing eligibility criteria and have not reached their 26th birthday as of July 1st of the award year. And we're going to be talking about all of these provisions in much more detail as we go through the presentation. So this is just a quick overview. The second provision is to extend the length of time a foster youth is eligible to receive the Cal Grant from the current 4 years to up to 8 years, and then change the deadline for the Cal Grant entitlement application from March 2nd to September 2nd for foster youth who are applying to attend a community college. So this is a quick overview of the bill provisions. As I said, we'll be delving into each one of them more in a minute. But before we do that, I just want to share with folks and acknowledge who the bill author is. And my apologies, I've been told that my audio has been breaking up a little bit, so let me change how I'm doing audio. Hopefully this will be a little bit better. So Jim Bell Senator Jim Bell represents the 15th district in California, which is this area of San Jose and surrounding areas down in the South Bay of the Bay Area. He has been in public service for 3 decades and has a very distinguished legislative track record. He was one of the key authors who authored the bill that extended foster care from 18 to 21, so AB 12, which a lot of folks might be familiar with. He's done a lot of work in affordable housing, transportation, mental health services, support for victims of sexual abuse. He's really a true champion. So thank you to Senator Jim Bell for being the author of this legislation. So about the Cal Grant. The Cal Grant, as I mentioned before, is the largest source of state-funded student financial aid. It's about $2 billion a year that is invested by the state of California into the Cal Grant program. It's administered by the California Student Aid Commission, and it provides grants for full-time students of up to 4 years. It's not limited to full-time students, but it provides grants for the equivalent of 4 years worth of full-time attendance. So for a full-time student, the amount that a student would be able to receive at a community college is $1,672. That's to pay non-tuition costs. So tuition costs are covered through the Board of Governors fee waiver, now known as California Promise Grant, but there's $1,672 available for a student to cover other costs such as books, housing, transportation, etc. Little over $7,400 for student attending a California State University system campus, $14,000 at a University of California campus, and in those cases, as well as with students who are at a private institution, a little over $10,000. That funding does include funding for the tuition costs as well. So the amount of the grant is actually linked directly to the tuition costs at a CSU or UC campus for those two types of grant. So with this next slide, I'm going to try to give an overview of the Cal Grant program. I want to say that the Cal Grant is a complex program with lots of different parts to it. What I'm going to talk about here does not cover every nuance of the Cal Grant program. This slide does not include something called the transfer grant, which is a component of the Cal Grant designed for students transferring from a community college to a four-year university. So just to be clear that this is not the complete overview of the Cal Grant, but sort of the pieces that are most relevant to our bill. So within the Cal Grant, we've got the A, the B, and the C. The C is for technical and non-transferring associate degrees. Our bill really looks at the Cal Grant A and Cal Grant B entitlement programs. So with both of these, the Cal Grant A requires a higher GPA, 3.0, and the Cal Grant B is for those with a lower GPA, 2.0. The Cal Grant A is for low to middle income students, so you can be slightly higher income from a higher income family and qualify for the Cal Grant A. The Cal Grant B is limited only for low income students. And the Cal Grant A provides tuition costs, whereas the Cal Grant B provides funding for tuition as well as non-tuition items, like I mentioned before, funding for things like books and transportation and food. Each of these there's an entitlement program component, which is a student who meets the qualifications for either of these programs, the GPA, needing to be under certain income and asset ceilings and submitting all the required documentation within the right time frames. Anybody who meets all of those criteria would qualify for one of these Cal Grants. So to qualify, you have to complete a FAFSA or a DREAM Act application by March 2nd to qualify for the entitlement grant. You have to submit a GPA verification form. This is typically done automatically by the high school. That also has to be done by March 2nd. And you have to apply within 1 year of high school graduation to qualify for one of these entitlement Cal Grants. Now, for students who don't meet one of those criteria, maybe they missed the March 2nd deadline if they're at a community college, or they are apply after that 1 year high school graduation window, they can be entered into a pool for what's called a competitive Cal Grant, but a very small fraction of students who end up in the competitive Cal Grant pool end up getting a grant. It's less than 10% who receive a grant. So whereas 100% of students who qualify for the entitlement grant get one if they meet all the various criteria, if you end up in the competitive pool, your chances of getting a grant are dramatically diminished. So the Cal Grant A and the Cal Grant B entitlement programs, again, is sort of the components of the Cal Grant program that SB 940 is really taking a look at. So moving on to the actual provisions themselves. Provision 1 is the provision that authorizes a foster youth to receive an entitlement Cal Grant if they meet the other existing eligibility criteria and have not reached their 26th birthday as of July 1st of the award year. So essentially right now, the way that it works for an entitlement grant is a student has to apply within 1 year of high school graduation. And if they miss that window, they cannot get the entitlement Cal Grant as an entering freshman, either into community college or a four-year university. What SB 940 proposes to do is to expand that window for foster youth so that rather than being limited to having to apply within 1 year of high school graduation, foster youth would have up to age 26 to apply for a Cal Grant and maintain their eligibility to get one of these entitlement Cal Grants. So that is the first provision of the bill. And so why age 26? We chose age 26 because we wanted the bill to align with other programs out there, just ease administration of the bill, make it sync up with some of the other programs, in particular at the colleges that are already in place for foster youth. So 26 is the age that foster youth are entitled to priority registration, where they get to register for classes prior to the general registration period. 26 is the age cap for the Next Up program, also known as KFES, which exists at 26 of the colleges right now for foster youth. 26 is also the age that Medi-Cal provides coverage for youth who were in the foster care system. So anybody who was in care at 18 is entitled to continue Medi-Cal coverage until age 26. Why do foster youth need this longer window? Well, there's a few things that transpire typically in the youth of somebody, in the life of somebody in the foster care system that impact when they are most likely to go to college. So first, placement changes often disrupt the educational trajectory of foster youth. 1/3 of foster youth change schools at least once during their school year, which is 4 times the rate of the general population. So we know that foster youth get moved around from school to school quite a bit. They don't have the same kind of consistent educational experience as other youth do. We also know that foster youth are less likely to have received a high school degree or GED by age 26. And you can see from the statistic there, 40% of foster youth have only received a high school degree and have not participated in post-secondary education by age 26. Whereas only 22% of the general population falls into that category. And then lastly, foster youth don't have the same kind of adult support or information regarding higher education. Unfortunately, this is an area that still just falls through the cracks. Foster youth don't have parents in their life necessarily who are providing this kind of support. In surveys that have been done, about half of foster youth, 1 in 2, reported receiving no help whatsoever or not enough help in regards to college planning. So as we move on to provision 2, I'm going to turn it over to the bill's co-sponsor, Juana, with the LA Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you, Debbie. So first, I just wanted to acknowledge how much we at the LA Area Chamber are excited to be co-sponsoring this bill. We understand just how important financial aid access is to college attainment, and we believe that the provisions of this bill will really make a dramatic difference in foster youth's ability to access the Cal Grant. So I'm going to walk us through Provision 2 and Provision 3 of SB 940, starting with Provision 2. So in addition to extending the application window that Debbie just described, SB 940 would also extend the length of time that a foster youth is eligible to receive a Cal Grant from the current 4 years to up to 8 years. As you can see from this diagram, currently all Californians are eligible for 4 years, the equivalent of full-time status enrollment, to renew a Cal Grant award. Under SB 940, foster youth would have an extended time of 8 years, which translates to more time to reach the finish line. Next slide. And why we put 8 years on here is really just by looking at some of the data. So first, we see that foster youth in our state are placing into remediation courses at much higher rates than the general population. So this graph is really showing us the remediation placement rates for foster youth in California community colleges compared to non-foster youth. And remediation courses are sometimes known as developmental or basic skills courses. But what's important to note here is that these courses do not actually have college credit. And in many cases, a foster youth might be placed more than one level behind. So if a foster youth is beginning in remedial courses, they are already starting out with a longer path to graduation. And in some cases, that might be one remedial course, 2 remedial courses, or even 3 remedial courses. And if we think about how a course must be taken in sequence, that might be as much as an extra 1.5 years tacked on to their expected graduation date or their expected time to transfer. And again, if we just look at this graph, we can see that when it comes to English and certainly math, our foster youth are placing into those remedial courses at much higher rates. So just looking at math, we see a placement of 87% of our foster youth requiring at least one or more remedial non-credit math courses. And this is, again, adding on to the length of time that they're going to remain in college before they can get to graduation or transfer. So in addition to placing into remedial courses at higher rates than the non-foster youth population, our foster youth are also having lower course success rates. And so earlier, Debbie had presented on some data that highlighted the academic achievement gaps for foster youth compared to non-foster youth in K-12. And we really see that these trends play out once our foster youth get to college. So the data that we're looking at now is showing the course success rate, and a course success rate simply refers to the percentage of foster youth that are successfully completing a course with a passing grade of A, B, C, or P for passing. And if we look at the data for our foster youth enrolled across the California community colleges, we see that foster youth have lower course success rates than non-foster youth. And while this is certainly true for those who are already in our credit-bearing college-level courses, we see that this is further demonstrated for our foster youth who are beginning in those basic skills or remedial non-credit courses, with only 43% of those students achieving success in those courses compared to 61% of non-foster youth. And when a student is unable to successfully complete a course on the first attempt, they do have to go back and retake the course in a subsequent semester. And so again, having a lower course success rate translates to a longer time to degree completion, and again, putting our youth our foster youth are much more likely to begin in community college, which just takes students longer, whether they are seeking an associate degree or whether they're planning to transfer and go on to that BA degree. And if we can see on the next slide, college. And this is a trend that's, this is a distribution that's almost perfectly reversed when we look at the general population. So for our general population, non-foster youth students, we have 36% who are attending a 2-year college compared to the majority, the 64%, who start off at a 4-year college. And what this means for youth, depending on where they begin their college experience, is again a difference in the length of time that it takes for them to reach graduation. So the bar at the bottom of this page is really indicating the average length of time to degree completion. And we can see that students who start off at a 4-year college have an average of 5.1 years before reaching that credential. A student, by contrast, who begins in a 2-year college takes an average of 7. Take for them to reach graduation. So the rationale or the logic between Provision 2 is simply that the reality is a lot of our foster youth are beginning in community college, and it's going to require longer than 4 years in order to reach graduation. Next slide. So in addition to these big changes to the Cal Grant program, SB 940 is also proposing to extend the Cal Grant entitlement application window from March 2nd to September 2nd for those foster youth who are applying to community college. So as we can see here from the visuals, currently if a foster youth submits their FAFSA or California Dream application by March 2nd, they will automatically be receiving an entitlement award. So this is part of the guaranteed award pool. If a foster youth or if any student submits a DREAM Act or a FAFSA application after that deadline, but before September 2nd, they will be entered into the competitive pool where there are much fewer, more limited awards, and it's much harder to get a Cal Grant. So under SB 940, we would simply change the entitlement deadline to match up to September 2nd for those community college students. Next slide. And why this matters. So we know, as Debbie has discussed, that our foster youth are less likely to have a parent or a consistent adult who can assist them with their college planning and who can help them keep on top of key deadlines. And so we see this translating with FAFSA and Cal Dream Act submissions. So currently about 40% of our foster youth are submitting a FAFSA or Dream Act after the March 2nd window. And just in the 2016-2017 school year, this translated to about 7,800 students who missed that March 2nd deadline. Next slide. So it's important to note why this deadline is only applicable to students who will be entering a community college. So what this chart here is attempting to illustrate is really the different timing in the admission cycles for the California community colleges compared to the four-year universities. So as you'll note, for a student who plans to enroll at a Cal State or a UC, the application window is really early on. So typically the application deadlines are about 8 months before the first day of fall classes. And this means that CSU and UC financial aid offices are actually packaging financial aid and making decisions about institutional aid dollars much earlier on in the process. For students who are going to a community college, we see that they actually have a much extended admissions window. So a student going to a community college may often be submitting their college admissions application after March 2nd, perhaps during the spring, and completing their matriculation steps then. So community college financial aid offices, as a result, have more flexibility in how they are packaging their aid, and they're able to make decisions about awarding institutional aid much closer to the first day of classes. If we were to try to extend the current deadline from March 2nd to September 2nd for those students going to a four-year university, we see that they would actually not be well served by that, and they may actually be adversely affected given how the campuses are awarding financial aid and the timing of those admission cycles. So for that reason, SB 940 is proposing to only change the deadline for Cal Grant entitlement to September 2nd for foster youth who are going to community college only. So with that, I'd like to invite Xavier Mountain, who is a former foster youth, to give his perspective on why SB 940 matters. So again, we'll transition it to Xavier Mountain.
Yeah, hello, good morning. I appreciate everybody for being here, willing to listen to the change in the Cal Grant. My name is Xavier Mountain, and I'm a graduate student at USC. At 2 years old, the state designated my drug addict mother as unfit and my undocumented father as unworthy. At 9 years old, I learned that being beaten was not normal, and being called out of my name was not a sign of love. At 15 years old, my life changed. Like, when years of abuse and neglect, it converged all into one day of hurt and pain, and it sent me spiraling into the foster care system. Being at such an age the first time in the foster care system, when I got a second helping of it, it was not familiar, and I did not feel a sense of comfort. Immediately within 6 months, I went into 5 different high schools, and within 3 years, I went to 4 different placements. Ultimately, as a result of being in such an unstable environment, my academics ultimately, it suffered, and because of that, going into community college, I took remedial classes because I scored extremely low on the placements, which also extended my time in community college. Because just to get to my actual core classes, I had to meet the prerequisite requirements. But adding on to my already existing extended period in community college, I had to work day and night, but not working for a degree. I was working to survive. And because of that, once again, I was facing the reality of my academics being affected. But luckily, when I got close to the my 4th year, I was able in community college, I was able to go beyond my circumstances and get it together. Then I transferred into a 4-year institute. Most foster youth, they often use a lot longer than 4 years to finish a college. And some don't even realize that they even want to go to the 4 years. So within that time span, by the time they realize they wanted to go, they've already used up all of their Cal Grant. Luckily, I received the Cal Grant for the first time when I transferred into my 4-year institute, and I received the Cal Grant while in community. I did not receive the Cal Grant when I was in community college, but if I had, I would have ran out before receiving my bachelor's degree. So with that being said, if the Cal Grant eligibility window is extended to 8 years rather than 4 years, and the extended time period to apply deadline is extended to September, it would take the stress of financial burden off the already struggling foster youth. And this will help foster youth all across the state. That's how important the Cal Grant is to many foster youth. And if I did not receive that, if I didn't get lucky enough to make it within that time frame, I definitely would not have finished my bachelor's degree. With that being said, I would like to thank JBEG and LA Areas Chambers of Commerce for co-sponsoring the bill, as well as Senator Beal for authoring it. But one last thing I just like to state, and I always hold firmly, I know that you may not be able to help everyone, but those who you can help will make all the difference, because growing up, it made the difference to me. And with that being said, I would like to turn this back over to Debbie. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Xavier, for your perspective. It's really valuable to hear, and we really appreciate your being with us. I'm going to go to the next slide, and we're going to transition over to Esteban with Senator Bell's office. Esteban, I'm not sure if you're on mute. We're not hearing you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, great.
Great. Hello, everyone, and good morning. My name is Esteban Ginsberg. I'm a legislative aide for Senator Bell, and will be staffing SB 940 during this legislative cycle. So I'll do a quick overview of some of the challenges we're anticipating, as well as a timeline of the bill moving through the process. And I just also want to thank Xavier for sharing his powerful testimony. It's those stories and those challenges that have motivated Senator Bell to get involved in this issue and be a champion for foster youth. So with that said, what we're looking at with SB 940 is a significant lift. I think it's clear to all of us here why this bill is necessary, but it will be important for us to communicate that to others to help this bill be signed into law. So some things to consider are the financial components, with the instability at the federal government and questions about what type of aid and money will be allocated for students hoping to pursue higher education. That's a consideration, as well as the current California budget and how there's a pending recession that will likely hit the state. So really being able to communicate the need for action now in increasing the amount of aid we provide for foster youth will be important. And with that, SB 940 will require additional allocations in the budget. And with that, we'll be doing a parallel budget ask, which I'll get into, excuse me, which I'll get into in subsequent slides. Additionally, there are many students that could benefit from having additional access to the Cal Grant. And while we ideally be helping everyone, we need to be able to communicate why it's so necessary for foster youth. And again, that's clear to us, but being able to communicate that to others will be important as the bill moves forward, and having testimony from foster youth and being clear on the data will be important for that. So why don't we go to the next slide? Right here is a general timeline on the legislative process. So we introduced SB 940 on the 29th. The next step will be for it to be heard in its first committee. It was just referred officially online to the Senate Education Committee, and their first hearings are going to be sometime in March, and we're looking at either the 14th or the 28th for the bill to be heard. In preparation for that, although it is a month away or more, we want to make sure we have everything ready to go. So that will be in required drumming up support in the form of support letters, contacting the other legislative offices on the committee, and then, if possible, having people come in person to that committee hearing. So this will be the only committee hearing, policy committee hearing, that we're anticipating for SB 940. So it'll be important to show a groundswell of support for this bill. If we're fortunate enough to pass out of the committee, we'll likely be referred to the Senate Appropriations Committee, which will take into account the fiscal costs of the bill. We're working right now to get an estimate of that, but the legislature will put their own price tag on it. The Senate Appropriation Committee, as well as the Assembly Appropriation Committee, can be a little bit of a black box. So what we're doing in anticipation of that is just getting all the data we can to be clear on what we anticipate the cost to be. And making sure that it doesn't get caught up in some of the politics in the Appropriations Committee. If we're to make it out of that, it would then go to the Senate floor, and then passing out of there, it would move on to the other house in the Assembly and go through a very similar timeline and process, where it would be first heard in the Education Committee, probably the higher ed one, as it says there, and then on to the Assembly Appropriations Committee, and then onto the floor. If it were to take on any amendments in the Assembly, it would have to come back to the Senate for a concurrence vote. If it's not significant, it's usually more of a formality. And then once that's done, it goes on to the governor's office for his signature or a veto. We are already working on communicating with all involved committees and the governor's office to make sure that they're aware of the bill, and if they have any questions, we're able to answer that. So that's the legislative timeline. We'll be needing support from everyone involved throughout, and we'll be sure to communicate what exactly that looks like. And I'll go into a little bit more detail in a few more slides. So next slide. Right here is the budget process, more or less. Because of the anticipated allocation needed to help support additional Cal grants being awarded. We're looking at communicating with budget staffers and being involved in the budget process to get that allocation in the budget. So the governor's budget was released last month on the 10th, and we have a general sense of where money is going to be funded, but the Senate and Assembly will be holding their own budget hearings and developing their own budgets to negotiate with the governor on a finalized one. For our purposes, we're hoping to get our budget proposal for SB 940 funding as soon as possible. We want to be ahead of the curve and being on the forefront of things. Hearings for the budget will begin near the end of March, and we want to have our we're looking at end of March type deadline, and what we'll need there is support as well. So support letters, people coming out to the hearing when the budget items being considered, that sort of thing. And if it is approved and other legislators are supportive of it, it will be hopefully included in the budget proposal from the legislator, where it can be combined with the governor's original proposal. Next slide. So here is how you can help everyone on the call. So we can use as many support letters as we can for SB 940. What these do is shows voting members on each committee the amount of support behind the bill, and they do make a difference, especially if the legislator is, if the letter comes from someone in that office's district, or someone an organization that they're familiar with and have respect for. Additionally, if it's someone who will directly benefit from this, such as a foster youth, that goes a long way in persuading or getting a senator or assembly member's attention. So as we mentioned in the handout section, in the handout section, there's sample support letters. So you can story. Furthermore, we'll need support letters for both the policy committee, so the Senate and Assembly Education Committees, and for that budget committee, which we're hoping to have a date for coming up. Other ways you can help is by Facebook as well. So hashtag Cal Grants for Foster Youth and hashtag SB 940 will be the two we'll be consistently using. So if you can retweet, tweet it, make a tweet yourself, and tag some of the legislators on the committees, that would be very helpful in building support for the bill. And here again, we have some of the committee dates listed, and the more people that can come out, and we understand that it does take time, and not everyone can make it out to Sacramento, but the more that can, the better. And if you're not able to make it to Sacramento, meeting with the legislator in your district, going to their district office, or even just a phone call or an email, letting them know that you care about this bill and this bill matters, will, one, get it on their radar, and two, show them the support for it. And again, getting foster youth involved and having them share their stories and why this bill is needed and how it will help them. Their testimony will hold the most weight. And then stay tuned for more. This bill is going to take a lot of effort, but it's not the end-all be-all. If it were to pass, there's more work to do always. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Debbie.
Great, thank you so much. So we're at the Q&A portion of the webinar now. Juana, I'm going to address the first question to you, which is how the bill will define foster youth. Like, what age would somebody have had to have been in care to qualify for the Cal Grant?
Sure, thank you, Debbie. So currently, foster youth are able to indicate their foster care status when they are completing a FAFSA application. There's currently a question on the FAFSA that has phrasing about being in care at the age of 13 or any time thereafter. For the purposes of this bill, we are really focused on the age requirement of age 26. And so with SB 940, we are again trying to extend the eligibility window for foster youth to apply for this bill. Right now, when they're applying for a Cal Grant Entitlement Award, they must do so within 1 year of graduating high school. And this bill is really trying to extend that up until the age of 26. So the foster youth must be 26 or younger as of July 1 of the award year.
Great, thank you. Somebody did email in asking about getting the PowerPoint, so I just want to reiterate that we will be sending the PowerPoint out along with sample support letters and a link to the audio for this after the webinar. So the next question, Esteban, I'm going to direct this to you. By when would you like organizations to email in letters of support?
Great question. We can take them right now. So no later than the week before the first hearing. So working backwards, if we are in the first education hearing, which is March 14th, we need them no later than March 7th, but we're ready to take them now if you're able to get that together.
Great. Thank you. So somebody wrote in with a Cal Grant related question. What grant would you qualify for if you attend a community college and are pursuing a certificate program? So the Cal Grant, as I said earlier, is a very complicated program. And so typically, you know, what students are directed to do is to make sure that they get their application in by the deadline, that they verify that that their GPA verification has been submitted by their high school. And as long as they get both of those things done, then the financial aid technicians are the ones who suss out the eligibility for the different types and all of that. So students don't necessarily need to worry about if they're going to get a Cal Grant A or B or C or that kind of thing. So another question, if there are students that want to get involved, how can they do that? Esteban, do you want to answer that? And I can maybe add to some thoughts as well.
I'm sorry, could you state it one more time?
If there are students who want to get involved in the process, how can they do that?
Great, yeah, so it would be showing up in whatever capacity they can. So being a presence online, social media, recruiting their friends to show support as well. It really depends on their capacity. So sending letters, showing up in Sacramento, meeting with their local legislator. If they're able to organize a phone bank type activity where they can call members on the committee and making sure that they're aware of the support for the bill. All those efforts go a long way.
Great, thank you. So there's a follow-up question that just came in that I'll respond to, which is, how do we get our students involved in giving testimony at the hearings? So my recommendation would be that if you have students and would like to participate in actually bringing them to attend hearings in Sacramento, that you get in touch with me, and my email address is there on the screen. Anybody can show up at a hearing and provide testimony, but by communicating directly with me, and letting me know that you plan to come, we can send you talking points and work with you around the timing. And also that way you'll be sure to get any updates. Sometimes the rooms change at the last minute, things like that happen. So it's great if we can know that you're planning to come with students, and then we can work with you to make sure that you have all the information you need to get them there. So there's another question that I'll go ahead and answer, which is, what is the primary reason for the low funding award for financial aid? And based on the research that we did, it does seem to be a combination of factors. It's not one single reason. So there are some students that don't meet the March 2nd deadline. There's another group of students who don't apply within 1 year of high school graduation. There's another group of students who maybe did manage to do that, but then maxed out their 4 years. And so they're no longer getting a Cal Grant because they ran out of time. And so that's why the bill really takes this three-pronged approach to really get at all the different reasons that we are aware for why foster youth aren't getting access to the grant. Another question, so somebody just was asking about, just to clarify on the eligibility on this. So just to clarify, a youth would have had to have been in foster care after the age of 13, after their 13th birthday, to qualify for these benefits. So it is set up to align with the federal definition that provides foster youth with independent status on the FAFSA, in care after 13. So the next question is, how will foster care status be verified? So a youth would check off the box on the FAFSA indicating that they were in care after age 13. And the process of verification is actually changing right now because of a bill that we did with Senator Bell last year, SB 12, which will actually enable foster youth to have their status verified through an automated data match with the Department of Social Services. For right now, students do have to bring in a printout verification from the foster care system that shows that they were in care to verify their status. But moving forward, that is actually going to be shifting to make it easier on foster youth to be able to do that verification. So one last question. We have a couple minutes left. Somebody is asking about whether we think the bill will eventually extend to youth who have experienced homelessness. So SB 940 is very specific to the foster youth population. But that being said, we certainly recognize that there are other populations that need support, whether they would need this specific intervention or something different. We would have to take a closer look at that. But we're very interested in looking at ways to support the homeless population as well. And I know that the Chancellor's office at the community colleges and both the systems office at the CSU and UC are taking a close look at the issue of basic needs and how those systems can do more to support the homeless population. So with that, we're at the end of our time. If I didn't get to your question, feel free to go ahead and send it to me directly. And again, letters of support at this stage are really, really crucial. We'll be sending out an email to you with more information. Feel free to go ahead and download the letters from the handouts. They really, really do make a difference, as does showing up to those hearings to testify. We really need to show just a broad base of support if we're going to get this bill through the very challenging process of any bill that requires a budget allocation. So feel free to reach out to me with other questions or if you're interested in getting involved. And with that, that concludes today's webinar. Thank you very much for being here.